Good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good morning, sun. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good morning, sun. Good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and in love. Good morning, sun. Good
And good morning, good evening, happy Friday. Deserves a celebration. And let's just do a little sound check here. Okay. Yes, good morning, evening. Hello. Hi, Christian. There was just a BC Beer and R, and sorry for the back to back, but I just do the live streams to get it done, and I did wait until 9:30 to hope that Beer and R wrapped up. That was a big event, over 100 people, which I will briefly touch on today. So let's get into it. I have a lot of stuff today. So, the theme is Business Central is booming. I mean, you're going to see a lot of stuff going on. It is just, I don't even know what to say about it. First off, I maintain a list of all sorts of Business Central resources. This started in, I think it was April 2019 when I started this, because I literally couldn't keep track of how to find this Microsoft page, or who wrote that blog post, or there was some Microsoft article discussing how to do this. And so I just started to compile a list of things because I was completely lost. And it has since gone from kind of a quick guide to find something to almost a monument. It's become over 245 items on this list. And so I don't know how effective it is at finding the one thing, but I try to just put everything on there, and it's just kind of my directory in case I need to find something. So as of yesterday, I had over 245. I think I added a few more, so it's like 247 or something like that now, which is crazy. I mean, I think when I got to 100, I thought it was crazy. Now it's gotten even crazier. And a few things of note. I will mispronounce his name, but Milan Milincevic, wild guess there, has started a new blog, and he found some very interesting kind of weird performance issues. And it looks like it's related to BC on-prem, but I'm curious to see if he starts to do some articles or discussions of, hold up. BC SaaS or online stuff. And side note, I am monitoring chat for YouTube and Twitch. I do not know if I am able to see the comments that come through on Twitter. I do have to have my iPad open with the video here just to see if a Twitter comment comes in. If anyone's watching on Twitter, say hi, and I'm just kind of curious if I see it. The Restream chat tool does not currently support the new Twitter video streaming API. They previously did support the Periscope API, which I was able to see Periscope chats come through, but since Twitter dropped Periscope and kind of integrated into just a Twitter streaming API, I don't know if it works. So let me just say something. Hello, everyone. Okay. So with that, so Milan has a new blog. Camille, he apparently had an old blog, but he has created a new one. So blog.kind.cz. So check that out. And then Alberto over here, I didn't know. I don't know if I knew about his blog, but I saw it recently in my Twitter feed, businesscentralgeek.com, and he has some cool articles, so check out his blog. So all three of these are now on the BC Resources list, which is bit.ly/BC Resources. So if you ever are looking for something, a blog, someone on YouTube, Twitter, whatever, check out my blog posts with BC Resources, and it should be there. If there's something that I don't have on there, let me know. You can reply at the bottom of the blog, do a little post. You can hit me up on Twitter, or my Gmail address is in the header of the blog post. And I try to keep it BC SaaS focused and more community contributions, so you won't see vendors or partners necessarily directly listed there usually. So anyway, I hope that is helpful. Okay, so next up, Jeremy Viska has accomplished something which we have kind of wanted to do. One second, let me dial down the audio here. Something that we have wanted to do for a couple years, and it's just been pretty difficult to figure out how to do it. And I was not aware of this service called Homebrew, something like Mailbrew, I think it is. But he found out about it. I guess it's relatively new. And Mailbrew is an interesting service that aggregates a bunch of feeds, whether it's Twitter or YouTube content or blog posts or RSS feeds or website updates. I don't know what all the options are, but we've been wanting to try and aggregate all of this into a digest. And I was thinking I would use Power Automate to grab this stuff and somehow assemble it, but it gets really, really difficult to assemble all of that content into a daily or weekly digest and send it out. Well, it turns out Mailbrew just does that. So if you go to his sparebrain.com website, his blog, he has a blogs roundup delivery post that allows you to subscribe. And it's like a 1 or 2 click subscribe, enter your email address, and Mailbrew will send you these emails that he kind of curates the feeds on, and it just summarizes everything. Very, very cool. And so he has AJ's calendar on there. There's tweets, there's blog posts, other information. So a really nice summary that is the culmination of 2 years of trying to figure out how to do this. Jeremy figured it out. He's paying for the Mailbrew service, and great way to just get your morning digest. I think I actually get it at late in the evening California time, so it must be kind of synced to a Central European time zone distribution. But awesome service. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay. A while back I asked if I could, this was after the Directions EMEA conference, and I saw all the tweets and everyone having a great time and how awesome it was and all the great conversations that I was missing out on. But I have 2 kids. My wife works. I'm taking kids to school. I am the family Uber and event organizer. So it is really difficult for me to travel internationally, especially these days. Travel is kind of a nightmare. So I was thinking, well, I kind of missed out, so maybe I should start to attend a European conference. Well, the people who attended EMEA said, oh, Steve, you need to come to EMEA. But then there's this conference called BC Tech Days, and I've never been there, so I don't know what the difference is. Like Directions EMEA seemed like more my speed, like what I would be focused on, but everyone's saying BC Tech Days is the de facto standard. And so the poll said BC Tech Days, but I have a feeling that is biased toward more towards technical and development. And while I would love to be doing that, I'm basically starting a new business, and 99% of what I'm doing is emails, administrative, fighting with Microsoft, trying to get AppSource published, just like not the top 10 things that I want to be doing. And code is like way, way down on the list, and I can barely write a page of AL. So I don't know if BC Tech Days would be as valuable for me as Directions EMEA. I'm not sure. So I'm trying to figure that out. The comments said that maybe Directions EMEA would be more appropriate, and the conversations with the Microsoft Business Central team might more be appropriate for me. So I may look into that. And one moment. I have cold or allergies or something. Okay, so that's coming up. Speaking of which, if you want to see Waldo in an Iron Man suit, it's a real suit. He's going to rent it, and I hear they are working on plans to hoist him up on wires and fly him around the convention center there. And he will be flying around before his presentation in an Iron Man suit. Truly, I mean, thank you, Waldo, for making the sacrifice. So anyway, BC/NAV Tech Days has announced that they will be having their conference 17th, 18th November 2022 in Antwerp, Belgium. So yeah, I know everyone's excited about that. The promo video is on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's very well done. Really nice. They have kind of a action hero movie theme where they've put everyone's faces like Waldo, and very, very nice job. So really cool promo video, and I suspect they're going to have pretty good attendance. So if you're in Europe, check that out. And speaking of conferences, we have the next Dynamics Con virtual online conference, March 15th through 17th, 2022, coming up. And I believe, yes, I think the session submissions are open, and that extends through January 7th, 2022. I am having a hard time lately coming up with session ideas because, as I said, I'm dealing with all the administrative pain of starting a business, working with Business Central, developing AppSource apps. So I'm kind of rusty on the subject matter expert. So I will see if I can come up with a couple of session submissions, and it is up to everyone to vote to see whether it would be of value, because there are, 60, 80, 100 session submissions for Business Central. So it's a pretty competitive marketplace. So why would you attend Dynamics Con virtual? And it is free. It is online, which obviously travel is a problem for, many of us, just aside from the craziness, just the time off from work, the expense. If you work for an employer who isn't, say, a BC partner or a Dynamics partner, it can be challenging. So this is really nice way to participate in a conference, see the sessions, and all of the, you have live Q&A after each session, and all of the sessions are posted to YouTube afterwards on the Dynamics Con channel. So really amazing event that the Dynamics Con and Dynamics user group team put together. at the last minute on a shoestring budget for the first one, and they've now formalized it. They're highly organized, and Molly and Liz and the whole crew behind the scenes making that happen. Really, really amazing event. If you have not attended one, it is a very good time. Okay, so next up. So this is why I am not developing. And coincidentally, it's also why we've been unable to publish an update to our AppSource app for, as of the end of this week, 7 weeks. So starting Monday, we'll be on week 7 of having no access to our commercial marketplace account. So this is a cautionary tale to anyone with a Microsoft Partner account, whether that's Partner Center, Partner Source, or a commercial marketplace. If something happens to your login and there is a problem, good luck. That's all I can say. 7 weeks and they are unable to figure out why my account doesn't work. It took 6 weeks just to get me to log in to Partner Center and have that work. Now, someone did something. They didn't tell me that they made a change, but magically my login just started to work. And I was able to access my Partner Center account. 6 weeks to get that far. And I had to really scream and yell and complain, unfortunately. But now, your organization is not participating in commercial marketplace. We have an active AppSource listing, and it's in beta. We're trying to update it for 6 weeks now, and we can't produce a new release. So we've been dead in the water. So just a heads up there. Something goes wrong, you have a problem. The support is absolutely horrible. Sorry to say, it is the worst technical support experience of my entire life. It is abysmal. I finally got routed or escalated to someone who's seems to understand at least what the problem was, instead of just immediately closing my tickets without even responding, which was the first 4 weeks. But they're literally looking at my account and they're like, we don't know why it doesn't work. It should work. We have no idea. This is the support rep. This is the back-end team. They've taken recordings of all my clicks on my computer. They've taken my tenant ID. Nothing. So pour one out for my AppSource listing. We may be out of business before we even get started. So yeah. And Jeremy, speaking of sad times, those of you in the Business Central SaaS world, good segue, Jeremy, by the way, thank you, may have heard that yesterday there was a Business Central outage. And technically, this apparently was considered a worldwide outage. It affected tenants from California to New Zealand to Europe to Canada, all over the place. And at first, it made it seem, the description of the problem made it seem like every single BC environment was affected, or every single BC tenant was affected. But after some tests, I found that in my particular case, my demo tenants, just that I use, the free ones, total demo sandbox environments, I could not get to those. But I was able to get to our paid tenant for our company. So I don't know if it's random, if there was any rhyme or reason for that stuff. But yeah. I think Eric Hogarth said that that wasn't the case for his customers. There were paying customers who were down. So it wasn't just paid versus demo. Eric also said that some of the smaller customers came online well before his largest customers. So it's unclear like what caused certain tenants to still work, others to not work. But it was a pretty widespread outage. And the common question with Business Central is like, how do I check what's going on? And I don't know when this got added for Business Central to show up as a service in here, but I don't think it was available a year ago or even 6 months ago. I'm not sure, but it is now available through admin.microsoft.com or apparently through portal.office.com or admin.office.com, whatever your Office admin portal is. So it's available for those two. I don't know what the reason is for one versus the other. Maybe in your organization, you're the Microsoft admin. Another organization, you might be the Office admin. But basically, you go into your admin center. You need to click on Show More on the left side of the page, and then you'll see a Health, and then you click on Service Health. And if there is an active outage, you will see this, what is highlighted in yellow, Dynamics 365 Business Central. And this was yesterday. It was an active incident and service interruption, updated 8:40 a.m. So that's one way you can tell is through these admin portals. And if you click on the incident, it will bring up a sidebar on the right, which will have status updates of what's going on, what they're finding, what they're trying to do to remediate it. So just to let you know, that is available. Oh, and Sasha says the Partner Center commercial marketplace pages weren't available for us as well yesterday. Well, I'm sorry you're joining me in that experience. I would say you have 6 weeks to go before you can compete with me. Yeah, so I'm assuming that was coincidence unless there's some tie to the Business Central infrastructure that was blocking access to commercial marketplace. So that's interesting. And Jeremy said that some folks were showing a service was up, even though the service was down. And I think that that was Eric's comment on Twitter. They said that service is being restored. Some customers were able to log in, but Eric's had a few customers who still could not get in. And I believe Kristen Hosman and Shannon Mullins both indicated that their customers were able to log in, but things were very, very slow still, which I get. Like you don't restart a global infrastructure or resolve an issue immediately. It's going to take presumably a couple hours for the patch or the fix they release to propagate. And then the infrastructure needs to recover from the issue that occurred. So I get it. Now, I understand people were frustrated. I'm sure a customer who had critical operations going on was not pleased. But I gotta say, kind of selfishly, as a consultant who's dealt with on-prem, I was kind of leaning back saying, cool, I can get some work done. I literally got some work done yesterday. So it's trade-off. You know, if you're affected and you can't process your manufacturing orders, I get it. That's a real economic problem with serious consequence. As a consultant who is no longer responsible for that infrastructure and who doesn't get the call at 9 p.m. or on a Saturday or a Sunday, and I'm okay with it. Like Microsoft's dealing with it, I will accept that trade-off personally. So what was going on here? I don't know that we have a definitive explanation of like exact infrastructure, and they may not release that because it's their infrastructure and it may not make sense to what we care about. And basically it says estimated. Now, if you read these notes, the time zones, there's a few typos and it is unclear what time zones these times are in. I don't think it was done consistently. I don't know if they're going to go back and fix these, but it says estimated start time, November 18th, 4:48 a.m. I don't know if that's UTC. I don't know if that's CET. But so 4:48 a.m. But by 8:40 a.m., there was a post in the admin service status that said, we identified high resource utilization in an infrastructure responsible for environment authentication. So something changed and it was causing authentication failures, or they were unable to authenticate from a Business Central tenant, and that caused you would get a service not responding or timeout error when you tried to connect to Business Central or launch Business Central in a browser. So had to do with authentication infrastructure. I can't tell if that was a Business Central update that rolled out that caused the problem. But or if it was an Azure update. But in either case, they were able to resolve it. Now, this one says the final status, we determined that the recent service update contained a code misconfiguration, high resource utilization, performed a rollback, and confirmed via telemetry that users had access, it was being restored. So something to do with authentication infrastructure, presumably. So one might ask, how can we proactively monitor the status of our BC tenant, even though Microsoft's on it, obviously? And to get back to the time, notice the timestamp here, 3:24 p.m. That was when the final status message was posted to service status. And again, I don't know what time zone that is. And so if you go from 4:48 a.m., which I don't think that's the same time zone, because the first kind of incident response was somewhere in the like 6 or 8 a.m. And so like I don't know if they really knew about it at 4:48 a.m. in the same time zone. So if we say roughly 8 a.m. to 3:24 p.m., like that's a good 7.5 hours, 8-hour outage. Not trivial. And I'm sure the BC team is kind of beating themselves up over that, whether it was under their control or not. They are actively investigating just to understand what happened and how to avoid that in the future. So I think this was the longest outage that I can recall. The last one I think was 45 minutes. So it was pretty short, and it was isolated to Europe, I believe. This one was global. Let's say it affected over 50% of the tenants, and it was roughly 8 hours. So pretty big deal. So excellent question, Christian. Thank you for another segue. You guys are reading my mind. Is there a way to be actively notified as a partner? Do we have to constantly monitor? Of course, that is the obvious next question. So there are a couple proposals. One is that Stefano De Miliani has a blog post of one way that he quickly put together to potentially monitor, actually two ways, I think, a couple of techniques to potentially monitor Business Central status through Azure. And I think he's using a couple features within Azure App Insights. I need to review it to try to fully understand how he did it. But basically he's saying you can ping your Business Central URL or the host name, but that doesn't really tell you. So the ping would return yesterday. You would get a response because there was a web server, an edge host that is responding to pings and network connection requests. But the problem is when you tried to launch the BC app, that app would try to internally authenticate in Azure, and it was that authentication step that failed. So it was an application error, not a network connectivity error. So you would get a false positive ping. You're thinking your service is up, but when in reality, it was the back-end infrastructure that was having a problem and the app didn't work. So how do you deal with that? So Stefano has proposed a couple ways to potentially monitor. And very cool chart in Azure that says, okay, what is the availability and what is this response time? And he has a threshold for connection or ping latency. I don't recall. I need to read it more carefully. But this is a little complex in my humble opinion, and I don't know. I think there's an easier way, is my guess. So enter Twitter. So Roberto Corella made a very excellent observation. Well, fortunately, he happened to be doing something at the time of the outage, and he said, why do you think that during the outage, the APIs were working? And this is a great observation. And it oftentimes it's hard to notice these things or test these things because you're dealing with the outage or you're dealing with something else or you're actually getting work done. And he says, today I had a session in the BizApp Summit in Latin America, and I couldn't access BC, but I could access the BC API. This is fascinating. So it's like, aha. So I said, well, were you using OAuth with the BC API? So I'm like, because my impression was it was an authentication problem. And so he says he was using basic authentication from Azure Functions to BC, which is very interesting. So he was able to connect to the BC APIs with basic auth. Now, AJ replied that he was using OAuth. It worked at first, but then subsequently failed. So this is great detective work by Roberto and AJ. So this is very, very interesting. So AJ effectively is pointing out that the Business Central API using OAuth authentication is potentially a proxy for the Business Central application service health. Now, obviously, it won't test all the components of, say, a BC web server infrastructure hosted in SaaS, but I think it is a great way to do it. So for instance, if I set up an Azure function or maybe even a Power Automate flow, can I set that up? And my tendency would be Power Automate flow because it's a little easier. Can I do a Power Automate flow that uses OAuth to connect to a few BC APIs, maybe list companies, list customers, basic gets, and that will verify OAuth authentication, which according to this would validate your authentication infrastructure, right? And that would be both Azure as the published app and potentially back into BC and AAD in the whole bit. And then because it's hitting the BC API, that at least tests that component of the BC backend infrastructure. Now, does it test rendering web pages? Probably not equivalent. But you could, while they still exist, potentially hit a BC API, a v2.0 API, and you could hit the the OData v4 URL, which could be both a query and a page. And so if you find a simple one under BC Web Services, hit an API v2, OData v4 page, OData v4 query. And I suspect you get a pretty good cross-section of backend or service health testing through those calls. And all can be done through a single Power Automate flow, which would then proactively notify you of the service status. So I might give that a try in my abundant free time. If anyone else wants to venture out and do that and let me know how it goes and write a blog post about it, that would be awesome. So that is what I suspect might be a better way to monitor BC service status on a continual basis with notifications, super simple, no digging around in Azure. But if you want some more advanced, more nuanced monitoring, Stefano's blog post might offer you some hints there. So with that, on the reliability and service status front, Yoon Chu has another fantastic blog post where he points out that the Business Central Admin Center now has a restart environment button. And those of you who have kind of needed this feature for whatever reason in the past, maybe through a support case, I believe the prior hack, the workaround, was to go into Admin Center, go into your environment and paste in a App Insights telemetry key. And the side effect of that happened to be that it forced a restart of the environment, like immediately. It would kick everyone out. You'd have a few seconds of downtime for your users where they couldn't connect, and then the service would be back up. Well, thankfully, Business Central team was probably acutely aware of that workaround, and they finally added a restart environment button. Now, it is buried a little bit in there, so it's not just glaring at you in Admin Center. But if you go into environments and then drill into manage sessions, you will then see restart environment. So, kind of cool. Now, I hope to never need this personally, but in case you need to do that, just be familiar with it. It is there now. Okay, so lingo. Business Central has a lot of lingo, and I just can't keep up with it. It's much of it is new to me. Maybe some folks from the Nav era, they're familiar with some of these, but I think Business Central SaaS it's inventing a whole new language. And one thing I am constantly noticing in conversation with my colleagues is when we're talking about, say, customer A, their Business Central situation, customer B's Business Central thing, our Business Central thing, we actually have multiple tenants, as I'll say. So we have company one, company two, then we have demos, and we can't keep them straight. And so we're constantly saying, oh, it's in this company's environment or that company's environment, or it's in our test environment. And I think we tend to use the word environment. But every time I say that, I have to pause. I'm like, wait, I don't think it's an environment. I think that's a tenant. And we have to sit there, literally have to pause on the call and say, wait, is that a tenant or is that an environment? Wait, production versus sandbox, that's an environment. Customer A versus customer B, I think that's a tenant. So when I log into Admin Center, I'm logging into my tenant. That is my company, that is my tenant, and a tenant can contain multiple environments. Let me know if I'm wrong on that, but I think it is. And Jeremy, I've got one for you. Don't worry. Be patient. You read my mind. So yes. And so here in my BC Admin Center for my tenant, you see environment quota usage. You see my environments listed, production, sandbox one. So I'm going to try to introduce better rigor with my colleagues so that we differentiate between tenant and environment, because those are two very different, very important distinctions. And like we talk, oh, is that app from AppSource installed for this customer? And they're like, yeah, but it's in Sandbox. It's not in production. So we need to be very clear. Is it installed in the Sandbox environment in the customer's tenant, or is it installed in our test environment or test tenant? So it's confusing. So I think tenant versus environment is a very, very foundational, fundamental distinction that I know I need to be more rigorous with. So Jeremy. Here you go. I was dealing with the tenant versus environment lingo discussion, and Jeremy found and tweeted this today in Naming Matters in Business Central. Again, we're inventing lingo on the fly, right? And if there isn't rigor around which words to use when, things get very confusing very quickly. Like when a customer calls me and says, oh, hey, I need help with dynamics. Can you help me? What does that even mean? Like the word dynamics is literally meaningless. So it starts to cause problems. It starts to cause confusion because a customer thinks they know what dynamics is when really they don't. And there's 10 things behind the scenes that you need to then figure out. So Jeremy points out, was working with module info, which honestly, I don't even know what that is. I'll need to go look it up or have Jeremy explain it further. And he asks, why the heck did we suddenly call it package ID? Generally, we don't call anything in the rest of extension development a package. I know the compiler does, but that's also confusing, which means we have an extension, a package, a module, an app, and a solution, all roughly meaning the same thing. And yep. And between development, app source, publishing a solution, a package, an extension, like we have all these words swimming around that starts to like it's fine if it doesn't really mean anything and you're talking about the general concept. Like, okay, we kind of all know what you're talking about maybe if you say these things. But when you're getting into specifics of, say, publishing on AppSource or troubleshooting a problem, and you need something and it says, give me the package ID, it's like, wait, what? What does that mean? What are you referring to in this sea of words? So if we could slim this lingo diet down a bit, that would be really nice. I totally agree. So more lingo. We're not done yet. This one has been killing me since day one. And I swear, if you ever have to get on a phone call and explain Business Central Web Services to someone who has no idea what Business Central is, it is an uncomfortable conversation. I feel like they must think I'm crazy when I try to explain this to them and differentiate these things. Because in Business Central, like someone says, oh, do you have a web service or do you have an API? It's like, yes, but let me clarify, right? It's the whole dynamics conversation again. Yes, there are web services. Well, what does that mean? Are you talking about the OData v4 web services or the SOAP web services? Or did you really mean the API v2 API web services? But within OData, we have OData pages. Bad. OData query, apparently, as far as I know, acceptable. Like, try explaining this to someone who doesn't, without getting into the whatever the plumbing is behind the scenes. It is painful. Like, this needs some serious cleanup. And what's worse is when someone starts using some of this and they think they know what they're doing. They're like, oh yeah, I've totally easily connected to the BC Web Services. You're like, oh boy, here we go. And I say, well, are you using the API or are you using web service? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm using BC Web Services. I just clicked on this connector and it just connected. And then I, spent 40 hours on this Power App or Power Automate Flow or Power BI report, and it's magic. Like, why is this so hard, Steve? And it turns out they are connecting to an OData v4 page web service, which is, slamming the Business Central backend infrastructure, whatever is going on. Or maybe even worse, they're using SOAP, and that's utilizing some other code base within Business Central. So, yeah, Jeremy points out, don't forget some of those are also REST. And it's like someone might say, I'm using the JSON one. You're like, ouch. Or I'm using the REST one. Ouch. Like, those words mean nothing anymore. Like, you can't say REST anymore. That's just like that's a general technological implementation. You need to understand like what's going on the BC side. And I've had to have these phone calls, and it is so confusing. And the worst is when I say, I tout the Microsoft party line and say, oh, you should use the Business Central API v2, the Business Central APIs or web APIs. I don't even know what to call it. I just call it the API. And they're like, well, isn't this an API? It says OData v4 URL. It's a URL. It's an endpoint. It gives me data. How's that not an API? Like, well, it's the other API. So anyway, lingo. It's painful. So with that rant, good luck. Nice segue. BC design patterns and best practices. Boy, that would be nice, huh? So I will admit this is out of my league, above my head, above my pay grade, because I just don't have the development chops to follow this. But the longtime nav developers, the people who've been working with CAL and now AL, who know what they're doing, they have spoken with each other and got together and figured out, okay, we really need to try and offer some standards, some guidelines, some best practices before we have a Wild West here at .NET. And try to encourage some consistency, because we no longer have, a formal 2 to 4 week Business Central AL programming boot camp that you can attend and get trained on the way. So you have all these developers, all these ISVs doing some pretty wacky, zany things that you may not notice how problematic they are now, but give them some time, get 1,000 customers on that solution, and even the BC team maintaining servers may start to take notice that there are some problems going on. And these could be performance problems, implementation issues, where this trigger that occurs on this page conflicts with this extension or this new Business Central feature. And it's going to start to get complex as these messy code bases start to interact, or this extension prevents that extension from being installed. So whatever that may involve, there is a team of people here that has created a new effort called It has a couple names, which, by the way, fellas, you may want to get more consistent on your naming because there is a GitHub repo called AL Guidelines, and there is a website called alguidelines.dev. But the website that I went to says BC Design Patterns and Best Practices. So, like, I understand a friendly name, but it also may confuse some people new. So there is an effort to try and publish these, document these, and these are both just, syntactically, maybe how to, indent your code, how to close code, how to terminate a loop, whatever. And then it's going to expand into design patterns. So how to best implement number series is the only one that I can think off the top of my head. So there is a GitHub repo that Microsoft is now maintaining. It is under the Microsoft GitHub account. And the Microsoft team will be contributing to that. But also Waldo and Henrik and AJ and Jeremy will also be contributing to it. So, and it is open source effectively. It is on GitHub, so you can contribute via that if you know how, which again, I don't know how. So, and Jeremy says, fair criticism of the naming. They did rename it 5 times as they tried to come up with a name. So, yep. What is in a name, right? So I understand the challenge of that. So that project is launched. It is live. It is officially announced as of the BC Birinar this morning or this evening, depending on where you're at. So that is live. So if you're into AL code, if you are a shadowy super coder, as our US legislators like to call them, you can contribute to the AL guidelines and the BC design patterns and best practices. Go team. So again, another amazing community contribution. Thank you. Okay, on to more learning. I mean, I've got more content, so I apologize. There's a lot going on here. If you are not aware of Business Central Office Hours, this is an absolutely amazing program where the actual Business Central team, the program managers and even the developers, get on the call and present what they're working on, what their plans are, new features, particular topics they want to highlight, like telemetry, whatever. And these calls, I think they're generally monthly, but you have to go to this website. Oh, there it is. Okay, aka.ms/BC Office Hours, and you will see the calendar and you will click on the calendar date and then you register for that event. The next one coming up is discussing, can Business Central Online handle large customers? I'm going to guess the short answer is yes, but I suspect there are a few caveats. And that is November 30th at 5 p.m. Central European, 8 a.m. Pacific time for us Californians. So head on over and register. Just amazing conversation with the Business Central team. And you can ask questions regarding that particular topic. So I look forward to this one because this one is near and dear to my heart because I've worked with many applications and products and ISV solutions who say, yeah, our product works fine. Well, it works fine until you have a customer that processes 2 million transactions a day. Then it doesn't work so fine. Or it works great on my demo environment with 12 records, which is what the developer is working with. But when you have a customer that has 15 years of history in their database, it just doesn't work. And so it's a completely different challenge to get products to work in those environments than with a small test environment. And same with large customers. You say, oh, you just import records with configuration packages. Like, no, I need to import 500,000 records. And things quickly break down at that scale. That's kind of been my focus in the dynamic GP world. Very high volume, very large customers, integrations, high volume processing, up to millions of transactions a day. And I've seen nearly every breakdown that I can imagine for that product. So definitely check out the BC Office Hours, which is also available on my BC resources list in case you forget the URL, bit.ly/BC resources. And I recently posted a new blog post to help those of you who are enjoying trying to use Docker Desktop on Windows 10. And the fundamental problem appears to be that Windows 10 updates are outpacing the backend or foundational infrastructure that is used to build the BC Container Helper and BC Docker images. So if you're using Windows Server with Docker Enterprise Edition or Docker Engine Enterprise, I have had zero issues with that. But Docker Desktop is, dealing with a different pace of Windows updates, and it appears that the Windows 10 version 21H1 and 21H2, which I'm assuming relate to the year 2021 first half, second half, those updates are causing problems with the underlying base OS images that are being used to build BC Container Helper images. And from what I could tell of the issues listed on GitHub, Freddie is just running out of magical solutions and duct tape to try and work around these problems. He's tried everything. Some people it works fine. Other people it just doesn't work. Or maybe it works 6 out of 10 times. So if you are updating Windows 10 to 21H1, 21H2, just be aware you're kind of out in no man's land with regard to Docker Desktop and BC Container Helpers. So do not be surprised if you have failures building your containers. Now, I've posted because I already forgot some of the tricks when I was helping Matthew Perrin on this issue. And based on my experience working with Matthew Perrin on getting it to work on his, I think he has a Surface with 21H1, I created a blog post with a couple tips to try or tricks to try to see if that gets things working. One is trying to turn off Windows Defender. The other is turning off, I think, images in your BC Container Helper script, which makes no sense to me. It shouldn't cause an issue. So we don't know why that somehow works. And then the third one is isolation Hyper-V. So I think those are the only 3 tricks. So we don't have a lot of tricks in our bag for dealing with this. But give those a try if you're having an issue. If you find another one, please let me know. Reply in a comment under this blog or hit me up on Twitter, because we're open to any suggestions. Some of these are like, wait, how did you figure that out? So someone figured out that turning off the Windows Defender real-time protection allowed them to build the container. And so we're assuming there's a file locking or file scanning issue going on there. I would have never thought of that, right? And there may be other antivirus or anti-malware applications that are doing something similar. So if you find something, let me know. So Sasha says turning off Defender worked for him. Yeah, that seems to be the go-to for most people. But in the case of Matthew Perrin, it apparently didn't help. He turned that off completely, still didn't do it. So for him, removing the image name line from his BC Container Helper script, which it just doesn't make any sense to me, because my understanding is that image is created in the background anyway. An image name is just whether you want to keep that image for later use. So something weird is going on. So check that out. Okay, so speaking of Docker, where do you run your Docker? Now, I fought with Docker Desktop and I was like, yeah, not for me. Like, one, it made my laptop virtually melt because it was a ThinkPad Carbon X1, a super slim, super portable. It just wasn't cut out for that. It only had 8 gigs of RAM, just could barely function with Docker at the time. And this was a couple of years ago, like 2018, to be fair. So it just wasn't viable. Freddie has made significant improvements to the BC container creation process to utilize less memory. So it's much more optimized. So you may be able to pull it off on an 8 gig machine. I'd highly recommend 16 gigs personally. So for background, like, how do you host this stuff? You could do it on a laptop, but like, I had to buy a $3,000 laptop to really support the Docker desktop process. And I don't even use it just because it's slow and slower than a server. And I just find the server works well for me. In theory, you can do it. You can use this when portable on a laptop, but Like, it's just not my style. My preference is to have a server. So for background, here's what I've been doing. I buy a desktop PC, parts. I build it myself because I'm able to do that. And for anyone who thinks this is hard, if you've seen my Twitter, my 10-year-old daughter built her own gaming PC from scratch, from parts, with my help. I didn't help her do anything. She literally did everything. She held the screwdriver. She assembled the whole thing. So if my 10-year-old daughter can do it, you can do it. So there's a couple challenges. Buying the parts, knowing what to buy, that is a challenge. I will admit it's a hassle. But if you know what parts to buy, assembling it is not difficult. If you can use a screwdriver and put screws together, plug in a cable, you're pretty much home. You're set. So in May 2016, I built a new server for use as my Hyper-V virtual machine server. At the time, it was a Core i7 6700, whatever that means. It's just what I bought at the time. I didn't need a Core i9 because those were exorbitantly expensive, and they still are probably. I needed 64 gigs of RAM just because it wasn't that much more expensive than 32. So I just slammed 64 gigs in there. And over time, I cobbled together a bunch of SSDs. And I only use Samsung SSDs personally, the Pro model for my servers for reliability and warranty purposes. And I now have 3.5 terabytes of SSDs in that machine. And they're almost all SATA. I have one NVMe. It allows me to have 24 full virtual machines on tap. And these are Windows Server with SQL Server. They're full application servers that I can start up at any time. And I don't use all of them. So I'll maybe keep 6 or 8 active and running at a time, which is easily handled by this machine. It doesn't even break a sweat. It doesn't even use 32 gigs, I don't think, to run all the VMs. So I have plenty of capacity. 24 VMs I can have hosted on this machine easily. Now imagine trying to do that in an Azure infrastructure. Thousands and thousands of dollars, or you're constantly turning them on and off and juggling them. Just maintenance nightmare. And if you forget to turn them off, or you don't have the script to turn them off every night, goodbye wallet, because you will be spending a lot of money before you realize it because you forgot to turn off a VM. So I find Azure to be brutally slow. Like, just the I/O is horrible on the reasonably priced VMs. My desktop machine will blow an Azure VM out of the water any day of the week. And I've tested it. It's just, there's no contest. The I/O and throughput of a desktop motherboard with even a SATA SSD, not even getting in the NVMe, which is theoretically faster, the I/O just destroys a reasonably priced Azure VM. No contest whatsoever. Startup time, shutdown time, creating a new VM. In any metric that I care about, this desktop machine blows Azure out of the water. So between the economics of it and the performance, I've had no choice but to host my own server. And I've had this since May 2016 when I built it. Cost me, as far as I could tell, roughly $2,100. I probably added drive since then, but from what I could tell of the receipts, $2,100. It's been running flawlessly up until this last week for 66 months. I have not had to touch it. And I even posted a tweet of all the dust on the server because it just sits back there in the server rack covered up and I don't even notice it. And 66 months, and I've only had one problem. That was due to a loose SATA cable that I just plugged them out, unplugged them, plugged them back in, came right back up. The cost for me over 66 months has come down to $32 a month to host 24 VMs flawlessly. So I'm not complaining, Sasha, but Azure is a dust-free environment. I will agree. So every year or two, when I see the dust, I unplug this thing, I take it out of my driveway, I fire up my compressor, and I blow out the dust. And it literally creates a cloud that moves down my driveway into the street. And it looks like the plague just rolling down my street. It's actually very entertaining. It's almost like a swarm of bees, but it's dust. Giant dust cloud moves down the street. But I do that once every 2 years and it runs fine. The dependency or the issues with dust are being minimized with these new machine designs and NVMe. So, like, yeah, there's not much heat coming out of this thing. So, yeah, $32 a month. Like, I'll talk more about this. Literally unbeatable. There's absolutely nothing that I've found, and I've really worked hard to search. Nothing touches this. And if I have a problem, you're like, well, you got to maintain it, Steve. Well, I have 66 months of history, and this is probably my fifth or sixth server I built over the last 10 years. So I have a long history doing this. I've had two problems. One is I had a problem with the BIOS battery. The machine lasted so long that the BIOS battery and the motherboard died, and the BIOS, wouldn't have the right time. So I replaced the battery for a couple bucks, and I saw some corrosion, and so okay, time to replace this machine. That was after 4 or 5 years. It was an old Dell, or an old machine that I had bought. I don't remember, but I was like, okay, time to replace this machine. If the BIOS battery's dead, it goes. So every 4 years, I generally replace it. This one has lasted much longer, so I haven't replaced it, but it's probably getting close to being replaced. And I've had a bad power supply, so I replaced that. But again, $60, commodity parts. I can order any part for this machine or grab it from one of my spare machines and have this machine back up and running in minutes. If I have to wholesale port this over to a different machine, I have all the hardware to do it. All commodity interchangeable parts, so maintenance is a zero issue for me. So, except for the dust. So, on the BC side, this is my DIY server for Docker that I created in December 2018 after melting my laptop after directions. I realized laptop wasn't going to do it. I didn't want to install it on my main desktop because I like to keep that just for my what do they call it? Just my day-to-day tasks like Office, Outlook, email, web browsing. I try to keep this pretty simple and clean and live streaming. So I don't do dev on my desktop. This was a Core i7-9700 from December 2018, 64 gigs of RAM again. And this time the technology has advanced. I didn't need to use SATA SSDs. I'm able to use NVMe SSDs. And so I have 1.5 terabytes on here. I normally only run 3 BC containers, and I have my DevOps build agent on here. I can have multiple. It handles it. This thing doesn't break a sweat. It's just sitting there idle, like even when it's building containers. It's like, okay, yeah, like got anything else? So this thing is super powerful for what I'm using it for. Costs just under $2,000. At 35 months, I've only spent, average $56 a month. And that's just going to, slowly decrease over time where I'm going to be under $40 a month for this investment. And zero capacity issues. Performance is flawless. If I have an existing image of Business Central in Docker, I can create a new container in under 1 minute and 30 seconds now due to the performance improvements that Freddie has made with BC Container Helper. So, Azure cannot touch this in any dimension, period. You say, well, it's not accessible and it's not in the cloud. Yes, I do have to host this, but I have to host my desktop. I have to live somewhere. So I have all the infrastructure I need, UPS backup generator, internet, So yes, if, a plane crashed on my house, which has happened in my neighborhood actually, that is a possibility, but I got bigger problems at that point, and my Docker server won't even make the cut. And I'm happy to do a disaster recovery at that point. So about this server, how much capacity does it have? And I'm running Windows Server 2019 on here with Docker Engine Enterprise. I was using the Microsoft Docker Engine variant, whatever that's called. I think I recently upgraded it and it automatically pulled the Mirantis, whatever the Mirantis engine is called. And so last night I tested to see how many containers, BC containers, I could have running on this machine. And I just got tired after 15. I was like, okay, that kind of gives me what I'm what I care about. 15 active containers where I'm opening the web browser, logging in, refreshing the page to keep them active. And with 15 active BC Docker containers, I got up to 55.5 gigabytes of memory consumed. And it was running perfectly fine. So I still had 8 gigs. So I'm guessing I could run 20 active containers simultaneously. And that would be, say, 15 plus DevOps build agents simultaneously. Wasn't even breaking a sweat. You see the CPU's at 5%. So RAM is your constraint here. That'll be your bottleneck. And so with 64 gigs of RAM, like well beyond anything I would need at this time. And if I needed more capacity, I'd just buy a new machine, throw 64 gigs into it, and I'd be able to do 40 plus containers, which I personally cannot imagine any situation where I'd need that. Like maybe if I wanted to test like 20 different local builds of Business Central or have 10 builds of Business Central with 10 build agents, I don't know what that scenario is. Like Waldo may have a scenario where he might need that capacity. So speaking of Waldo, he is a big fan of Hetzner. And Hetzner is a hosting company, I believe, that was started out of Germany, but now they have 3 or 4 countries that they have facilities in. Now, their offer that would be relevant for Docker servers. And so Christian asks, under 1 minute, do you have parallelism enabled for Azure DevOps? Now, my container build process is under 1 minute 30 seconds for a new container of the exact same version of an existing image. So if this morning I run BC Container Helper and create an image and it's brand new, that will take, say, actually, let me pull it up. Let's see how long it takes. If you don't know, I have a script that automatically builds my containers, BC Insider, BC build log. Okay, so this is my build log. And so there it is, 1 minute, 11 seconds. And this happens to be for the exact same build of Business Central. So now how long does it normally take? Let me see if I can find that. So, sorry, this is all live. So let's pull from November 17th, build log. Oh, 1 minute, 19 seconds. Sorry. This is, okay. So here's one where it's a new image. And so this is a new image where you notice the old version was 32442. The new version is 32541. And so that requires a new image to be pulled from the artifacts. That took 7 minutes, 29 seconds. So that's your typical build time, right? For a full build. But once the image is created and is stored as a Docker image, under 1 minute, 30 seconds to build that. And that's mostly Freddy optimizing it. That's on an i7, right? This isn't fancy hardware. It's just a desktop PC. So like really, you do not need crazy hardware here. I personally say get it off of your laptop, throw it on a desktop, and you remote desktop to it, or you do remote development against that container. That's my preferred method. And, well, Steve, it's not accessible. Well, I have a VPN. So, which, yes, I have fought with my VPN, but my VPN is a SonicWall VPN appliance. I can VPN from anywhere, pop in, and I have access to that. So that works for me. If you like developing on a laptop, I get that. But in my experience, you need a beefy laptop, not your typical consumer laptop. So back to Hetzner and Waldo. Waldo has been using Hetzner. That's how I found out about it, through him. Germany and sorry, I'm terrible with flags. It's a Scandinavian country. How's that? And so they have 3 or 4 locations now, but their dedicated server offering is not yet available in the US. They do have a new facility in the US on the East Coast, but it only offers what they call their cloud servers, which is kind of like web hosting or internet hosting. It's not the dedicated server offering. And you will see this and say, wow, 34 euros, Steve, you're a moron for trying to host your own server. Well, not so quick. Number one, it's in Europe. So I can't get this in the US. And the second thing is, so I'm concerned about latency. Number two is, if you actually configure this and go through the checkout process, if I want Windows Server on this machine, here's the catch. You're paying 23 euros just for, sorry, phone call, 23 additional euros just for your Windows Server license every month. Now, I have MSDN. Yes, I admit I have MSDN through the MVP program, but yeah, you do have to pay for the Windows Server license one way or another. But that brings this price up to 57 euros. And if we do the math for us Americans, in non-inflation adjusted terms, that is 65 US pesos that I would have to pay every month. Not bad. I'm not. This is actually a fantastic deal compared to an Azure VM, right? So you have a dedicated i7 server with 64 gigs of RAM, two 512 gig NVMe SSDs, quad core. This is an awesome machine for 65 USD. Highly competitive with what I'm hosting for people in Europe. And so I haven't tried it to see what the latency is from US, but I'd say if you don't want to build your own machine, if you don't want to host, awesome deal. Makes total sense. Christian posts a comment on YouTube about the Hetzner video. I tweeted this out. Fantastic video. It shows their data center, and they're literally just cobbling together desktop PCs and plugging them in, and that's their hosting, and it's brilliant. It's exactly what I'm doing. And for $65 a month, yeah, like if I didn't want to build my own PCs, this is a highly competitive offer. So, and then the other catch for me is not available in the US yet. If it is available in the US, I would have a hard time like justifying building it for myself. Okay, moving on. A few Business Central feature, or a new Business Central feature, is I just noticed, I thought this was kind of cool. This is the peek preview of related records. And there's a crazy long URL, I apologize. But this was tweeted out by the Business Central Twitter account, MSDine365BC, I think. And it is, if you will notice that under that 30,000 number, there is a dashed line now. And that is yet another UI convention that if you hover over that, it does this little pop out that will show you some additional information. Now, I haven't yet looked how you code that in AL. So if I want to do that for my extension or my app or whatever, I assume that I can control whatever that displays, a flow field, an amount, related info. Maybe I want that to be the customer's contact and information and phone number because I'm doing a collection call. So interesting possibilities to save users time. So instead of having to drill in and view the whole card and find the field you want, some cool opportunities there. And I don't know if you can override that on a page extension or if this is only on your custom pages as a developer. That's what I'm interested in. So kind of cool. So balance due in local currency, 32,000. So that's the field that they chose to display. So I thought that was a neat one. And there are dozens of others. Maybe I'll have to do a separate one on the new features. There have been a lot of those. Okay, so that's the Business Central Roundup. Now, on to a slightly different note. Soren tweeted out a book recommendation that it's like, oh, okay. I use Audible and I like audiobooks. So I downloaded that immediately because I have a pile of credits I can never use. And so I started listening to this, and it's a good book. It challenges a lot of the, I don't know that they're urban legends, but they are widely accepted beliefs in terms of learning and practice and expertise and knowledge and what it means to be an expert. And many of these have been they were announced due to one study, but subsequently they were found to have severe flaws and not apply to a general audience. So the book talks about those, like the 2,000 hour, the 10,000 hour rule, like, and the golf as being an example of expertise in golf. You need to do these things as if it applies to something else, which it doesn't. This book talks about. So really neat book. And one of the things they mention is this term called desirable difficulty. I was like, hello, like that's my middle name. So basically they're saying if you do something and it is super easy, you tend not to learn. This is kind of the concept. But if you do something and there's a certain amount of difficulty to it that actually enhances your learning, allows you to remember it, allows you to kind of focus and internalize and develop practices that help you learn in the future. So a learning task that requires a considerable but desirable amount of effort, improving long-term performance. So if I build a Docker container and I use BC Container Helper and I don't run into any problems, I'm like, well, I don't know what this guy Steve is complaining about. That was super easy. Like, this guy must be like not so smart. Don't tell him. So like, and I get that. People have had that amazing experience where they just type these commands and magically it all works. Well, ask Matthew Perrin what it's like to try and build a Docker container. He'll have a very different story. But in the process of hitting these hurdles, Matthew and I, like, we're looking at this like, what's going on? And we actually had to learn what's going on, what was causing this problem, how do we resolve it? And so you have an entirely new way of looking at that experience than the person who just followed the script and it worked magically, right? We have an understanding of what can go wrong and why. Is it Defender? Is it the image? Is it something else? Is it Hyper-V isolation? So it brings new dimension. Now, I am the lucky individual that tends to run into every single problem along the way. I swear. Like, anyway, so I can relate to this desirable difficulty concept. I don't want it to be difficult, but invariably it is for me because I do everything wrong. But I run into every problem, and as a result, I write blog posts. I try to figure this out and help other people, and I learn in the process. So that was a really interesting book. I do recommend it. Neat. And in other listening news, someone recommended this a long time ago to me, and I have listened to it on and off. And I recently went back. It's like, oh, I need a podcast to listen to that, isn't about politics or COVID or, whatever. I was like, okay, I need a break for my brain. And every time I come back to this podcast, I am just blown away by what it talks about. It is absolutely amazing. And the host, Melvin Bragg, has a kind of a curated, moderated conversation with two or three, typically I think 3 experts in this topic. And they pick the most, like you think, Polish, Lithuanian, Commonwealth. Like, I can't possibly find that interesting. But then you start to listen to it and you're like, wow, I had no idea. They make it an incredibly interesting conversation. And corals, like, the whole coral reefs and the Great Barrier Reef and climate change and ocean temperatures and acidity. And so these 3 experts talk about coral reefs. And you're like, I had no idea. There's hard corals and soft corals. And there's shallow corals and deep water corals. And like really, really interesting stuff. And Polish, Lithuanian, Commonwealth. Like, wow. And I mean, this is really long ago. I think like 1300s, 1400s. And like, never heard of that. Like, I, as an American, would never know this or learn this in a history class, right? Very interesting. And Manhattan Project. I've read many books about the Manhattan Project and just incomprehensible how they pulled that off. 1, that it even existed. 2, that they did it in secrecy. 3, the hundreds of thousands of people involved in that project and that they were actually successful. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. This is a multi-nation effort, and the experts talk about that project and just how unbelievable it was that it occurred, the scale, the scope, how vast, the intellectual capacity required to make it happen. And next up on the list, I saw Evolution of Crocodile. So I'm like guaranteed fascinating conversation with every one of these episodes. Radiolab, Hidden Brain. Yes, all great podcasts in our time, like absolute just treasure like amazing discussion in under an hour. Just mind-blowing. So if you want a good podcast that really just is an intellectual exercise and teaches you something that you would say, there's no way I could, oh yeah, there is a way I could be interested in this topic. And a lot of his discussions are historical, so they seem really obscure. But then when they talk about what happened, you're like, oh my gosh, like there's one on Herodotus, so I need to listen to it. Like, what is this about? Really, truly amazing conversations. And on the geek front, I don't know who comes up with this stuff, but they're clearly like 27 standard deviations smarter than me. Someone figured out that if you start to mess with memory, computer memory, you can cause it to do weird things. And someone figured out that if they call specific memory locations in sequence down a line of the physical memory module, when you do that, when you buzz them thousands or millions of times a second, you cause adjacent bits to randomly flip. So it's a property of physical DRAM memory that this happens. And I'm sure there's an explanation of this due to the physics of the actual memory and the proximity of these memory bits and gates in RAM. So just think about what that took to figure that out and understand the mechanics of what's going on there. And the first iteration of this was called row hammer, because they're literally hammering rows of memory. And it sounds like a Norse god with a big hammer. It's like you're smashing memory. But row hammer turned out to be essentially a security exploit. And I thought they had issued, like Intel had issued a CPU patch to try and prevent this. Based on this article, it sounds like DDR4 memory attempted to implement some protections against this attack. But researchers, like, where did they find the time? They found a way to not just hammer individual rows in sequence, because that's kind of an identifiable attack, right? So presumably the DDR4 firmware or whatever that is protects against that. They figured out that they could do it in a random or a different sequence, so side by side across two rows. So this set, these gates, and they're flipping bits all over the place. And they found that by bypassing the individual row hammer technique, they could actually get better results. So instead of the old 13 out of 42 attack success, they are now getting 100% success in their attack with this new row hammer technique. 40 out of 40 randomly selected DIMMs in a test pool experience bit flips. We found that by creating special memory access patterns, we can bypass all mitigations that are deployed inside DRAM. And not only do they bypass the security protections, it actually increases the number of devices that can potentially be hacked up to 80% success rate. These issues cannot be patched because they are in hardware. Think about that. I have no words. This is truly amazing. And now, realistically, what does it take to perform this attack? I don't know. Does it require physical access, or can malware be deployed that can run on a Windows server or an Active Directory server, where malware can sneak in to the point where if it doesn't have elevated privileges, could a row hammer attack be implemented to escalate privileges and get admin access to that machine? From what I'm reading, it sounds like that is technically possible. I'm going to guess in a year, less than 2 years, we're going to have an active exploit that can make that happen. Crazy stuff. So with that fascinating news, That's the roundup of Business Central. And I apologize. Wow, I'm gone over an hour and 20 minutes on this one. There's just so much going on. The Business Central community is absolutely going nuts. It is growing in all sorts of directions that no one anticipated. So thank you all for your contributions. It allows me to drink coffee and talk about them. So with that, have a good Friday. Have a great weekend. And please don't take down the Business Central servers again, whoever did that. Anyway, have a good one, and I will talk with you later.
Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's